Welcome to the Own Your Life podcast, where our goal is to help bring hope, healing, and peace by sharing our experiences and inspiring you to own your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own Your Life podcast. Today we have keynote speaker, coach, and best-selling author, Mike Acker on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Looking forward to talking with you and really to talk to your audience through our conversation and giving you some value today about owning your life.
Awesome. We appreciate it. So to start off, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Absolutely. I always like to go back to the very beginning. So my parents were always entrepreneurs. And so I've seen that. So I know that a lot of people, you talk to entrepreneurs, I know that you have that spirit yourself. So my dad was a pharmaceutical entrepreneur in the 1960s and 70s. He was a drug dealer. And then he met my mom, and she was a witch, and they got together. And then when they decided to have a family, they decided to go legit entrepreneurship and started a coffee company right down the street from Starbucks, right when it was starting.
Oh, wow.
The original Starbucks. So there's where we were born, in Seattle, born and raised. Then my parents actually had a radical movement of encountering Jesus, and my dad switched off into law practice. My mom had a preschool, so I saw them do that.
Wow.
And then at the age of 10, we moved down to Mexico, and we went out there to serve the disenfranchised and the poor and the outskirts. My parents were not just like political Christians, not just church attending Christians, but full on everything Jesus said, let's do. So we were quite radical in serving people. And then about 7 years later, moved back to the United States, and I'm going to college, went into a pastoral career where I learned a lot of public speaking, had to overcome a couple of speech impediments, a couple of speech issues along the way, but eventually ended up going to pastoring ministry. And then I made a big switch. You know, when you're about 36, 7, 8, and you look at your life and go, let me just do something different. I've been doing the same thing for a long time. And through a really cool series of events, ended up going into sales, did phenomenal in sales. But along the way, I was coaching on the side. And then that coaching turned into a book. And then that book became a bestseller on Forbes and took off. As of right now, I am the 7th highest rated speaking author of all times.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Thanks. It's kind of an interesting way to just took off.
Yeah.
And then I've released 5 books, started a miniature publishing company, and started coaching practice, so that I have this going all around. And you and I were talking beforehand. I was recently in Tampa with a client and have done a fair amount of work in Florida. So that's where I'm at now. I do public speaking for large audiences, small audiences, virtual audiences, in-person audiences. I represent a couple of different speakers as well. And then I coach a lot of professionals and some athletes. Like I have a UFC champion on my roster, and I write books. So those are the primary things that I do. That's a little bit about who I am professionally. And then I am the husband of Taylor, and I am the father of Paxton.
That's awesome. That's quite the story, quite the turnaround for your parents, for sure. It's almost like a movie. So with that, how was growing up in Mexico?
You know, when you're 10 years old and you're doing really well and have overcome speech impediment, have built some great friendships, love your life, and your dad comes home and says, I've quit my job, we're moving to Mexico, it's not a best transition. And I remember getting to Mexico the first day. We drove down there. We rented out our house. We packed up all our stuff, and we moved down to Mexico. I remember the first night just getting there and crying. And then slowly finding some things that were interesting. I started surfing. That's fun. I was this tall white kid with long blonde hair, blue eyes, surfing in Mexico. So that was a lot of fun, that part. But I didn't pick up the language right away. And as many of my clients know, that when you can't communicate, there's disconnection.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't connect. I couldn't connect culturally, because so much language is connected through, or so much culture is connected through language. And so I had such a difficult time. And even in that fifth grade, I would be brought to school, and my parents immersed me into a inner city Mexican school, and I did not fit in. I mean, like, if you look at me, there's not a lot of brown in my skin. My heart, by the time I was done, was more Mexican than I was American. But man, I stuck out, and a lot of the people I went to school with in fifth grade had never actually seen an American, and
Wow.
American media had not penetrated Mexico like it has now. So it was tough, Ashley. It was tough moving down to Mexico. But by the time I was in ninth grade, I really consider ninth grade one of my favorite years of life. I partially because I just threw myself in and I just embraced it. And I would just encourage even people as you're listening, if there's this moment right now that you're struggling and you're just fighting and maybe looking back, and that's how it was for me in fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, looking back. Yeah, there were some good moments, but also looking back. Then eighth grade, I had a chance to go back, and I went back to Mexico and lived with the family, or back to the United States. And I lived with the family, and it wasn't as good as I remembered.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it was like, oh, this picture of my past I had been building up bigger and bigger and bigger. And what is it? That whole the rear view mirror.
Hmm.
Things in the rear view mirror are closer than they appear, or bigger than they appear. And that's how it was for me. It was bigger than it actually really was. And so, you know what? I leaned in, embraced Mexico, and had some incredible years as a result of it.
That's wonderful. And that's like your most formative years too. So that's very impactful.
Very impactful. Yeah. My first girlfriend was in Mexico, right? My best friends that have stayed best friends for a long time are Mexico, and I still speak Spanish fluently.
That's wonderful. Now, have you been back recently or?
Not recently, but obviously, yeah, I have stayed, and even when my wife and I did our honeymoon, we went and stayed there in Mazatlan a little bit and connected with some of my friends. And we've gone back many times, and I've gone back and I've stayed in contact with friends. We met up at Disneyland and
Oh,
met up
cool.
at other places where were easy to meet up in the middle.
Hmm. Very cool. So what were some of your biggest lessons that you learned out of that time?
One was that whole thing that I told you about, not looking back, and it builds up, and
Hmm.
embrace and lean in. The second part is, if when I first got down there, I hung out with Americans. Well, when you're hanging out with people, the classic line is, show me your five closest friends to you, and you are the amalgamation, you're the average of those people. Well, guess what? Because I was hanging out with Americans all the time, I was American and I identified as American. But as I moved into more of a Mexican centric life, I really became much more embracing of that culture and their
Hmm.
culture, and it became more of mine. The other thing I saw was in my speech. When I was a kid, I overcame a speech impediment. I couldn't say the j sound, and I really worked hard at it, and I really methodically worked at it and threw myself into it. Well, when I went to Mexico, I didn't throw myself in to learning the language as much, partly because I was looking back, partly because I was hanging around Americans all the time.
Gotcha.
But then as a result of not throwing myself into it, guess what? I blamed the language. I blame my circumstance. I just can't learn it. And I see this again and again. I work with people, and I didn't used to say this, but now when I'm onboarding a new client, I'll say, look, I'm going to give you strategies, and I'm going to give you exercises that if you will do, you will get better.
Hmm.
But if you don't do, you won't get better. And I don't want you to sign up. And as a result, it's like push-ups, right? Actually, like
Right.
if you say, hey, I want to get in shape, I'm gonna start doing push-ups and sit-ups, and you do it for 1 week,
Yeah.
nothing. But if you do even just 30 push-ups and 30 sit-ups every single day, and you do that for 30 days or 3 months or 6 months, and you add a little bit more,
Hmm.
then you absolutely will get stronger and more what you're working towards. Well, in Mexico, I was going through the classes, and I was going through it, and I was showing up, but I wasn't putting in the practice.
Mm.
And then I was blaming the circumstance. Well, I'm just not good. And sure, I wasn't as quick as my sister, but if I had done the work and applied myself and not given into the excuses,
Yeah.
then I would have seen greater progress than I did.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's huge because I feel like so many people come up with whatever excuse. Oh, I'm too old. Oh, I'm too young, or too this, too that. And oh, it's not my time or whatever. And really just missing out on something that could be amazing because maybe they are just blaming their circumstance instead of jumping in and embracing it.
Right. So here's my quote for you here on owning your life. You can't expect to do the bare minimum and get maximum results.
Amen. Yep.
So many people just, well, if I just show up once a month, can I get better? Can I get my whatever it is? And the answer is no. you
Right.
you can't. There is such a thing as working smarter. So
Right.
you're not just working harder, but there is an aspect of doing both. I
Right.
wrote my book. Some people come to me, and a lot of people have found out of my success. I self-published my first book, and so people came to me and say, how did you do it? As if there was like this magic thing that I did. And I said, well, every single day I woke up at 4:30 in the morning. I took a cold shower, and I sat down with a cup of coffee at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I wrote for at least 60 minutes. I made a goal of how many words I would write a day. And then I did that for 27 days straight. And some nights I worked. And one Saturday, we got my dad to watch our son, and I worked from Friday night and Saturday. So I spent 60, 70, 80 hours writing the rough draft.
Hmm.
And then I traded hours with somebody to content edit, and she tore it apart in
Yep.
13 hours of editing, tore it apart. And then I spent another month of rewriting it. So yeah, it just happened. No big deal. It was overnight success.
Yep. Yeah, everybody thinks it's just like the easy way out, that these people just stumbled upon, whatever accomplishments that they have. And I think it's John Maxwell that says, you want what I have, but you don't want to do what I did to get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like the same thing.
There's no such thing as an overnight success.
Yep.
Maybe on the very rare occasion, but even think about like a Justin Bieber, when he was overnight success found him playing drums on the internet. Well, he had to learn for years how to play drums, and he had to practice and practice and practice and put that time in.
Right.
And people who suddenly get recognized, they're getting recognized for years of activity that they've been doing. So success is recognized in a moment, but built throughout a lifetime.
Right. And people don't want to see that because that takes work, that takes time and effort. And they want to think, oh, I can just wake up tomorrow and write a book and be done in one day, and it's going to be amazing.
Right. Yeah. Or I'll pay someone to do the hard work.
Right.
Like, yeah, well, you can to some extent, but at some point in time, you're going to have to do something about it as well.
Yeah. And we value that so much here, is just doing the action. Like, you can say all you want, but you do have to show up and you have to do the action. So showing up is just a small part of it, but obviously you have to, put in the work for what you want.
Right. I would say anybody who's listening and going into a new career, and one of the things that I did that was always very helpful for me. And so I went into, I was pastor, and I was a senior pastor for a while, but then I went into some staff roles, and I was a corporate executive, and I did some sales. And my whole philosophy was show up before anybody for the first 3 months, show up before anybody, and stay after everybody.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't do that perpetually, but for the first 3 months, I would get there before, open up my office windows so people would see. And by the time everybody else arrived, I was already immersed in my work, already had a coffee. And so it set the standard of what I was expected. Oh, Mike's going to be the type of guy who is here before us, and he's going to be here after us. So it created this understanding of who I was. Now, once I had built up the rapport and built up the understanding, I didn't slack off, but I went back into a more of a manageable, balanced life versus over. And that was, my wife and I agreed to that. Okay, this is what I'm going to do at the beginning.
Yeah.
Do it for 3 months, and then I'm going to back off.
Yeah. And that's really good leading by example too, of, the kind of the standard and showing the consistency. Cause I think that's really important, especially in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, leadership is not what you say, obviously, and you already know this, and everybody probably listening already knows this, but it's what you say and what you do.
Absolutely.
And even then, when you do something that's wrong, it's also saying that you did what's wrong.
And
And
owning it. Yep.
throughout the course of time, I've definitely had to own my fair share of mistakes and errors and stupidity, wrong, and just not thinking through stuff, and have to backtrack and say, okay, yeah, yeah, I have some good leadership. I have some good things, but I also not perfect, and nobody else is either.
Right. Yeah. And people just seeing that, I think, is just so impactful, because people do pay more attention to what we do than what we say. And when those align, that's, it's awesome to see that, because that's not always the case.
Right. And as people, because we know that about people, what I always tell people, don't don't create any savior for yourself,
Mm,
because you choose a Biden, Trump, Obama, Bush, any president, they're never going to save you.
right.
And you choose any guru and Oprah, or it's always interesting when people are shocked that a celebrity said something 10 years wrong. I can't believe, let's cancel them. Like, well, what have you said
What
at the
about
last 10
you? Yeah.
years? like, like, if we put your life, well, that's different. They're getting paid for it. Hey, if you look at anybody or everybody, there's all been something. What means is that when we look at our heroes and our leaders, we need to be able to look at them with grace. And I feel like I was able to give our different presidents grace and other leaders grace, and go, okay, I see some things that I like, see some things I don't like, and in pastors and other people. And I'm not going to bank my life on any specific leader, but I'm going to pick and pull from them and follow them in the way that I go. I was a pastor. I loved this quote from the Apostle Paul in the Bible. And so whether someone's Christian or not, I think this is applicable. And he said, follow me. So he's telling people, hey, I'm a leader. I'm worth following. But then he has this little caveat, as I. So it's follow me. Hey, come follow me as I follow Christ. In other words, follow me when you see that I'm doing the things I should be doing.
Yep.
And don't follow me. So the unsaid word is, and don't follow me when you don't see those things.
Absolutely. And I think it's important not to make idols out of people, to realize that
Yeah.
everybody's a human being. Even Oprah, she's a human being. She has human needs. So, I mean,
Yeah.
nobody is going to be flawless or perfect or some, up on a pedestal that we want to put them on.
Right. I think it's fascinating to see Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates going through divorces at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa.
Right.
And you look at a Tiger Woods, who for years just seemed like he was untouchable, and then the scandal broke out.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that he's not a great golfer still. It
Right.
means that you probably don't want to follow him as he
Right.
does his marriages.
Yes.
but you can still follow him in other areas.
Yeah.
I think that as humanity, we need to be able to look at people and say, let me follow you as
Mhm.
as you do that, which I think you are doing. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people don't understand like how much pressure that is too. Like these people have so much pressure on them to act perfectly. So when they slip up, obviously there's a huge deal made out of it. But when it's us, it's kind of like, oh, that was okay. And, there's a little bit more grace and forgiveness with it, than,
Right.
Somebody's in the spotlight.
Right. We judge other by their actions and by their poor actions, but
Yep.
we judge us by our intentions.
Yep.
Well, I did something wrong, but I also know the backstory of why I did that wrong. So it's not that big of a deal. But
Right.
I don't know what your story is, but you're just wrong.
We justify everything. Yeah, exactly. I kind of want to backtrack a little bit. I saw that you had mentioned that you've had a lot of near-death experiences. That's
Yeah.
intriguing.
Yeah. A few. This goes back to living in Mexico, and this goes on from there. But for example, one time when I was 13 years old, I had been learning Spanish and had done my immersion program, been in a couple of years. I wasn't great. People still made fun of my Spanish, but at least I could speak it conversantly. So there was a mission trip coming in from America, and they were going to go to this small outskirts town in the far outskirts of Mazatlan, like a couple hours outside of the big city of Mazatlan. So they're out there, and I went to go be a translator. So I accompanied them, and we're staying in this one small little town. And now we're talking desert area. Mazatlan is a beach town, but these were desert areas. So we're out in this deserty area, small little town. We're doing some stuff. We're building a clinic center, and then we're going to go to a different town. So we're going to do it obviously by van. But one of the 19-year-olds said, anybody want to go on a bicycle with me? I challenge you. I take challenges. So I said, sure. So I jumped on the bicycle with him. So we get out of our small town, and my tire pops. And he says, oh, it's not that far I'll stay with you. I'm like, no, it's not that far, no big deal. And so he goes, oh, okay, just go up to the railroad, take a right, and it's just gonna be right there. Perfect. So I'm there walking and walking. My water runs out. I took off my shirt, I put it over my head so I'm not getting fried. I walk and walk a couple hours, get to one small town, and I'm out of water, I'm parched. And I'm like, oh, is this the such and such town? They said, no, 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 that's over the railroad, take a right. And so I was
Oh,
like, well, can I trade this bicycle? So they gave me one of those old banana bikes, you know what I'm talking about, with a really uncomfortable for males seats,
yep.
and just actually awful, filled my water with some unclean water. I'm back on the road. I get to the railroad, but I don't see any road. So I keep on driving. There's this utility truck that's out in the middle of nowhere, taking care of this big, huge structures out in the middle of nowhere. He's driving by, he pulls over, he sees this American in the middle of nowhere, pulls over. I speak with him. I hitch a ride.
Wow.
Like what you do when you're 13 years old in the middle of a desert, you hitch a ride from a utility truck. So I throw
Like
my
horror movie.
bike in it, and I'm like, yeah, just taking me up to the road. I heard this road. He's like, oh, that's way down there. So we go and go. He fills up my water. He drops me off at the road, and he's like, yeah, it's just down there somewhere. So I'm on now a major highway, not dirt roads. I'm going down this major highway thinking, no, 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 this is not what he said. Well, we were in the car for 30 minutes together. So now I got to backtrack to the railroad. I'm thinking, at least I'll just go back to the town. So I'm out of water again. I'm getting daisy. Yeah, it's 110 degrees out in the middle
Oh
of
my
nowhere. I get to the railroad, Ashley, and I see this small little road that I don't know how I missed. Probably my delirium. And so I take a right. But if you think about it, I was going the wrong way now.
You have to take a
But my
lap.
mind's there. So I go down, I go back. Finally, I'm on the right track, but I'm passing out. I'm falling off the road. I
Oh
could
my
barely keep
goodness.
up. And so I'm going forward and I see a fork in the road. I'm like, well, I never heard about a fork in the road. So I just went straight. I fall down about a mile down the road. I fall down and I said, God, you got to save me. I have no idea where I'm at. And I hear this putt putt far in the distance on the road that I'm on. This little tiny motorcycles coming up with a husband or wife on it. And I said, do you know where this town is? And he goes, yeah, it's back at that fork in the road. I said, well, what's down this way? He goes, well, there's a town called Rosario, and it's about an hour down the road. Well, they were on a motorcycle. So I was on my way to nowhere by myself. So I backtracked and found myself, and I was burned. I was dehydrated. So that was one. There's been
Oh
other ones, but
goodness.
that's one of those ones where you go. My dad found out later, and he was quite livid that
Oh, I
they
bet.
let me do that and didn't come searching for me.
Wow.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking, as a kid, I'm like, man, part of me likes that I did it, and part of me is like, yeah, that's awful.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, with that, so how has faith affected your life? Obviously, you're a pastor and you got through, crazy times.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I came to believe in God, and that God, not as an external force, but someone you could actually know and relate with, present through Jesus. So at a young age, I had this faith. And then as I think a lot of people who grow up in faith, there's a time where they go through some disillusionment. And often because we think that God owes us something,
Yeah.
as if the God who created everything and everyone, if you have this faith system, and I know probably many listeners don't,
Mhm.
but as if that God who created everything actually owes you something. But we need someone to blame, and we're not willing to blame ourselves or blame the people who actually did it. And so we take it out on him. The cool thing is he can take it.
Yeah.
And so I went through that series of disillusionment, and then even seeing him present during that time. And when I was 17 years old, and I was driving in Mexico drunk several times, and got in some car accidents, and kind of was rebelling. My family had mostly moved back up to the United States while they were running the mission from afar, and my sister had gotten pregnant. And so it was just this crazy time. I'm trying to finish up school in Mexico, and yet I would remember that God was present with me. And so there was this moment where I eventually just realized that the things that were going on weren't because God caused it. yeah, sure, God allowed it because he allows us free will, but he allowed some people to be very cruel to our family that had its consequences,
Hmm.
and allowed family members to do things that were not right. And as a result, there's turmoil.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, I realized that and became an anchor. And if I were to compare what God has been like in my life, it's like an anchor. And at times I'm taut, and so I'm not going too far.
Hmm.
But at times the anchor's, I'm still there, but I have a little too much leeway.
Gotcha.
And that anchor has allowed me to go through some times, and it's because of my own desires I've been going out there. So as a pastor, there's definitely things. I remember I was in my office one day, and I'm working with some people and helping them out. I get a call that my mom had been hit in a car accident, and lost my mom in a moment.
Wow.
And in one of those moments, I was so close though that it was like the anchor. I felt the presence of his life in me, one of the most supernatural ways. I remember I was associate pastor at the time, and I went to the pastor's office and I told him, and he's a bigger guy, and he came around and put his arm around me. And I was like, I remember it was the most supernatural moment in my life where I felt one arm on one side and another arm on the other.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then there's been other times my wife and I went through infertilities. There's been, I mean, definitely switching your career in your upper 30s after investing in one for a long time.
Right.
Definitely was like, wait a minute,
Right.
what am I doing?
Yeah.
And, and why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And leaning in sometimes and leaning out. But if I were to say just a simple answer to your question is, he's been an anchor in a whole bunch of situations.
That's awesome. So you feel like you ever ran away completely from God, or even when you were, rebelling, that you still knew that he was there?
And you're touching on, for people who are not growing up in the church, on a actually huge doctrine and debate that's got thousands of books written about it, called eternal security. But in that, I would say that I never ran completely. I thought I did at one point in time. My parents, I was a junior in high school, and my parents couldn't make me go to church. They couldn't get me to go to church.
Hmm.
And the things that always had worked before, when I was maybe had an attitude, just didn't work. I just flat out, it would have been a full on physical brawl if my
Yeah.
dad had pushed it. And yet I still would come home drunk and then pray. And I was never too crazy out there. Probably the worst probably was driving drunk.
Yeah.
And that was more of a common occurrence with a lot of my friends. And that was definitely not something good. Definitely something that could have landed in a bad trouble. Uh, I wasn't always the one driving drunk. Sometimes it's my friend driving drunk.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Right.
But no, everybody listening, that's a clear, obvious sarcasm.
Right.
But in the midst of all of that, I always knew that he was present and cared for me, even if I didn't necessarily want to follow him.
So what drew you back to him from times that you felt way more distant than you would have liked to have been?
Yeah, this is very interesting where our conversation has gone towards
Yeah.
faith oriented. And for me, it was, so the fuller story. I was in a junior in high school. My sister had gotten pregnant, had a kid when she was 18 years old. So my mom had moved back. And so in a sense, I felt like my mom was robbed of me, and
Gotcha.
I couldn't finish up my high school career. And then that was putting all kinds of stresses on my parents, and I could see it.
Yeah.
And so then my dad's going back and forth. So my dad's absent now too. And then my dad said to me going into my senior year, he said, Mike, listen, your mom and I are going to basically be in the United States all of your senior year.
Wow.
Now I'm super close. I'm more Mexican than I'm American at this point in time, by far. I already had my law school lined up. You go straight into law school in Mexico.
Mhm.
I already had it lined up. That's the Harvard Law
Okay.
of Mexico.
Cool.
And I already was lined up. And now my dad says, we don't want to pull you away. So you're welcome to stay in Mexico by yourself at the house. We'll have the maid make meals for you, and you can do that,
Mhm.
or you can come up. And so I had this decision point, and I just thought, where will I go if I lived there by myself. I was already throwing parties when my parents were gone.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
I'd have 150 people at my house.
And they
And
would never know.
yeah, I told my dad about this summer, actually, I told my dad about it, and he's like, what? And so I took the entire downstairs and moved all the furniture upstairs, all of it, the wall hangings and everything, a group of friends and I. We had a band in my back patio and a DJ on the inside. And
Oh,
by the end of
wow.
the night, we had gone through all of the disposable cups, but we'd also used every single pot and pan for water drinking
Wow.
or other beverages as well. And so the next day it was hours of cleanup.
With that.
And the neighbor told my dad, but my dad thought he was like, oh yeah, Mike had a party. Oh yeah, some friends over. Yeah, I did. So the of me staying here, the idea of me staying there by myself, I knew probably wasn't the best.
Yeah.
Without discipline, well, without the collegiate responsibilities that a lot of college students have. I mean, a lot of college students get off and going crazy. And so I just knew it wasn't the best.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came back, but then there was a sense of, and this is probably a lot of people can understand too, when you get uprooted from something that you know well,
Yeah.
your identity's caught up in a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm this person, I have these friends, I have this stuff, I get invited to these things.
Right.
Or in corporate speak, I was a real estate agent in Charlotte, and now I moved to Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley, right?
Yep.
And now it's like I know everything, but now I don't. And so your identity, you can get wrapped up in your activity.
Yeah.
And so I moved back, and it's like, who am I? Who am I without this? Well, at the core, yeah, the waves have taken me kind of far away, and I let out the slack on the anchor, but I knew at the core what I was anchored to. And so I had this moment where I was thinking about it, and through a series of events, ended up going to this dynamic youth group, and the speaker is still a great friend of mine. And I ended up getting connected to this church, even though I hadn't been wanting to attend. I went because of a girl, of course. And but the content connected with me, and he said things that I needed to hear. And so it was this moment where I was like, well, at the root of who I am, with all the external stuff going on, at the root of who I am, I really believe, and I would say this still, the root of who I am, I'm still a child of God. That at one point in time I was a pastor, at one point in time I was a corporate executive, at one point in time I was a salesperson, and now I'm an author, speaker, coach.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in time I was single, at one point in time I was married, at one point in time I was married and am married and with a child. And so I've had these different stages.
Yeah.
But if you go to the core of that, there's been with highs and lows that happen in life, infertility, all those different things. At the core, I'm still a child of God. And so I went back to that core and then rebuilt a life from that.
That's awesome. Wow. Very, very impactful story for sure. So how with a lot of that, and with what you teach your clients, how do you help people through fear and insecurity?
It's interesting that whole analogy of the anchor.
Yeah.
That is actually something I take people through,
Oh, cool.
but not in terms of necessarily faith. Like I
Yeah.
believe, let me help people the way they want to be helped.
Yeah.
I have a system of belief that I believe in, and if someone wants to know about it, I'll let them know. But everyone needs an anchor. And so even when I tell them, when you get up on stage, one of the reasons why you're afraid is that you cease to be yourself. So a lot of people, the way I describe this, and this is actually coming up in a book that I'm writing as well, that you have your identity, but often your identity gets bifurcated. It gets split into two, and you have your identity as a speaker when you're in front of people, but then your identity when you're doing everything else.
Right.
And so you got a person over here who's fantastic in their, when I'm with people, I'm confident, family, friends, whatever. But the moment I get in front of people, I'm confident doing my architectural job, one of my clients today, but I'm not confident when I'm speaking about it. I'm confident leading a company that's global, but I'm not confident when I'm speaking about it. And what happens? And one of the reasons why is that here, when they're just doing their life, they feel more tethered to their anchor. They're more stable, and all of a sudden they get far away from who they are, and they try to become someone else.
Gotcha.
A lot of people get in front of people and they take on a persona or a personhood that is not inherent to who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this. My fun story is when I was 26 years old, I had became a senior pastor, and I felt like I knew who I was as a speaker at this point in time when I was talking to kids and youth.
Okay.
But now I'm a senior pastor, and I have like lawyers and doctors and
Right.
scientists and these like real adults because I'm 26. I mean, I'm 26. I'm driving my Ducati motorcycle around with ripped jeans, right? And muscle tees and stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I didn't feel like a real adult. So I get in front, I'm like, I got to learn how to speak to real adults. And I felt like I had to shift away from who I naturally was, which is like what you're hearing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I started studying all these speakers and trying to take on their personhood. So if you're familiar with these people, I became Rick Warren, warm and bubbly. I literally memorized his sermons verbatim and switched out when he said my wife, I would say someone I know is his wife because I had met him. So I could say that. And then I became like TD Jakes, which is a famous black preacher.
Yep.
Yeah. So
oh my God,
imagine this like white kid in rural America be like, what you got to understand. And so people were entertained. I don't know if they were impacted, but they were entertained.
Oh my gosh.
But what happened is I had gotten away from my anchor.
Yeah.
And I had gotten away from my tether of switching what the anchor means to this identity of who I was and my natural. So a lot of people do that in the professional world, and they're not even quite aware of it.
Yeah.
They feel like they have to, now that they're in corporate world, they got to be calm, cool, and collected, or they have to be sales like that person, or polish like that person, or like this. Well, when you are other than yourself, you'll never be the best version of you. So I say again and again with people, and it's in my book, Speak with No Fear, that better to be a better version of yourself than a poor imitation of someone else. So lean into who you are.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways that people are full of fear, and one of the things they can do about it.
Yeah. And I think, especially with everything that's happened, I feel like so many people, their lives are turned upside down. And with all this stuff going on, the past 18 months has been pretty insane. So how have you helped people, or how have you changed even how you coach people just with all these challenging times that we're going through?
One of the things I do at the beginning of my day is I actually start with a short prayer, and I just say, help me help people. And that's just my goal. And so sometimes that means that I'm more listening you when I'm a coach. And sometimes that means that I'm more responding. And often along the way, I'll check in. It's like, is this where you need to go?
Yeah.
Do you want to go somewhere else? Is this what you want to do? So part of that is just really working on being more empathetic. So much so that I studied empathy so much so during the pandemic that I my 5th book, the last one I released, was called Connect Through Emotional Intelligence. And right in the middle of emotional intelligence is the idea of empathy and feeling with people.
Yeah.
So if I were to say that I've changed one thing, it was leaning more into empathy versus, well, just do this.
Yeah.
It'll be fixed.
Yeah, no, that's good. And we love emotional intelligence. We've done a couple podcasts on it. It's definitely something that I'm really passionate about because I feel like it's helped so much in that everybody can work on it. It's not just for professionals or for, families or relationships. It's for anything.
You're right. And it's the number one key indicator of success.
Yes.
That you can have smarts and you can have abilities and skills, but if you don't have emotional intelligence,
yep.
I mean, without using that word, it's what Patrick Lencioni, who's on my shelf, it's what he calls when he's talking about hiring people that you want hunger, you want to be hunger, humble, and smart. And he means people smart. He means emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, actually, I have mentors that said those same things, so it's very cool. And I feel like that goes with, your saying of where you are is not where you stay. So I feel like that can help a lot of people just by even realizing that.
Yeah, I love that. I got recently and see if I can pull it up really fast while we're looking. I read my I read the reviews that people give me, right, on Amazon.
That's
for
not
my
always a
book.
good thing, is it?
No,
Get
actually,
a bad one.
it wasn't at first, but I've actually now believed that it's really helpful,
Mhm.
because even reading the bad, you might not like it and you
Yeah,
won't, but it's good for you to be aware of how it's impacting people positively or negatively. So
absolutely.
hopefully there's not a brand new one that's going to shock me as I pull this up right now. But I love this one that I recently got. And let me see if I can find it. Um, yeah, there's a lot of different people here. Da, 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 da. And people say some bad things, but people say good things as well. In fact, I just saw a brand new negative one. Yay.
Mhm.
But there's this one that's talked about how he took a picture of it and said, this spot right here where Mike Acker says this is where it turned off. But it's exactly that
Mm.
whole part where I said, you have to begin with belief. And that's that whole thing of where you are is not where you have to stay. If you don't believe you can change, you're absolutely right.
Yep.
And Mark Twain says that, right?
Yep.
Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. I think that was Mark Twain. Whether you think you can, and if you think you can't get better and overcome your fear,
Right.
you're right. But if you think you can, and you're willing to put in the work, going back to that, then you're right.
Yeah. Our minds are so powerful, and we've spoken on that too, and that your mindset is almost everything, just the way that you're thinking about things, and the fact that you can change your thoughts, or you don't have to believe everything that you think. I think that for me, at least, that was really powerful, because I had always thought, however my thoughts are or whatnot, that's just how I'm wired and I can't change it. And
Yep.
I would say about 5 years ago is when I learned all of this and started personal growth and development, and it was like a whole new world was open for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting when I'll even read those comments when people say that. I'm like, I get where you're coming from, because I even write in there, read this book as a believer, not as a skeptic.
Yeah.
There's a place for skeptical thinking, but if you're full of fear
Hmm.
and you lean into that, then you definitely will stay. If you
Right.
believe that you're stuck, you are right.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of our audience, I feel like is people that are high achievers or that are wanting more out of life and that are feeling stuck. So how would you, is there anything, besides belief, that you would encourage them to explore, maybe to get unstuck?
Yeah. One is changing what's around you and being careful what's around you. There's been times where I've had to get rid of Instagram, get rid of
Hmm.
Facebook, get rid of the social media, because you're comparing your low moments to their highlights, right?
Hmm.
And there's been other times to get rid of the news app on my phone, and because I tend to read the news,
Yeah.
and being careful what's in that, and then getting some people around you. So often even addiction to negativity breeds in isolation. And so opening up with people around you and building that network. And I highly encourage that. On the other hand, uh, I also encourage people to be very aware of their weaknesses. So
Yeah.
going back to reading the bad reviews, I do want with support, with tempering it with others. I want to be aware of that. So it's not like this. I don't want to walk through life and just go, yeah, I'm amazing and I got everything perfect. And this is
Right.
the best book of the world. And I can't believe you do that. You shouldn't have your life filled with just yes people.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you shouldn't have your life just filled with negativity.
Right.
So if you're on the negative side, then bring in a lot more positivity. If you tend to
Hmm.
be just the positive, then you probably need to open up your eyes around the world and see that you might not actually be a positive. You just might be thinking you're entitled and not
Ooh,
ever
wow.
having what when you see some of the celebrities post and it's like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Come back to reality.
Yeah, maybe you need to go look at the world. And,
Yeah.
how can this happen to me? I always think this, actually, this is kind of a side note. When people in America wish that everything was fair, and I'm like, well, you really don't want to do that. Like if you do believe in God, or even if you don't believe in God, and you just want everybody to make something fair,
Mm-hmm.
and you're even a lower middle class or even upper poor class in America, and certainly if you're anything middle class or above, fair around the world is going to drop. And this might be a little bit controversial for some, but think about it. If you think about the mass of humanity living on so little, there's places where you can put in your income and you can see where you are, what percentage of the world you're placed in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can go on, I can't remember where it is, like global rich list or something like that.
Oh,
But
interesting.
you can put in your income and you can see how rich you are in terms of the entire world.
Wow.
So we talk about the 1%,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're lower middle class and above, you're in the top 5% globally.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
amazing. Yeah. And I think so many people haven't traveled outside of the States either to even see what the rest of the world is like.
Yep.
We're in our nice little bubble and we think it's amazing. And then, go outside of that and it's not like that.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the things that helped me in Mexico too, is just realizing that, gosh, there's a lot of stuff going on. One of the people that I work with, and I represent her as a public speaker, is Pamela Hawley. And Pamela went on a vacation when she was 12 years old to see Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And she saw poverty when she was there, and it wrecked her in a good way. And she could never go back. And so here's this woman who is just extremely talented. She's graduated from Duke, and you could just see how brilliant she is. She was in tech before a lot of people were in tech. And so now she runs universalgiving.org.
Mm-hmm.
And she finds ways for people to give. And they have this whole massive vetting process and volunteer. But they don't raise money. The way that they pay for everybody is not from taking a percentage of the money you give, which is a fine way for a lot of organizations. But the way that she raises money is they have provided service to companies, including Apple, making them being able to do corporate good, corporate social responsibility. But all of that came from her having a wider view of the world. Now, she does fantastic for herself, but I'm also sure she's also very frugal.
Yeah.
And they work for their money so that they can give other people's money completely 100% away.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I also was just thinking about how I can't remember what the time span was, but I was always told if you redistributed like all the resources in the world and everybody got the same amount, I think it's within like a year or maybe 2 years that it would just go back to whatever it is right now. Like the rich would still be rich and the poor would go back to being poor. Like it wouldn't take very long. It would just get back to that because it wasn't, the point was it's not who has what, it's what's your mindset and how are you going to handle it. Like just like the lottery syndrome, like a lot of them end up bankrupt, not because they got a bunch of money, but they didn't know how to manage it and they didn't have the emotional intelligence to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I think that because I've heard that same thing too, and I've thought about it. I think some like Jeff Bezos, you equal him out with the world, and in 1 year he's going to be rich again. And because he's learned the work ethic, he knows how to create something that people want. He's going to work it hard. And so I think people like that, and just obviously using and Elon Musk, he's just going to find ways to add value that's monetized and come back. But it also, we'd find those other people that are uncovered or undiscovered that would do it. Like I was in Haiti and there's just no opportunity in Haiti. So no matter who you are, there's just no opportunity. And why is it that a lot of people move to America for good or for bad? Why is it? It's because there's opportunity.
Right.
And so I was getting an Uber driver one time, and I was talking to him, and the guy was from a different country. And I said, "So what brought you here?" And he goes, "Well," and he started talking about his education. And the guy had his PhD and he's driving Uber.
Wow.
But there was more money and opportunity to come to the United States. So I think some of those people who, if you were to give them that leg up and give them opportunity where they're at, they would thrive.
Yeah.
And I think some of the people who are rich in the United States, I think they're rich because they're rich.
Born into it or whatever. Yeah.
Born into it, or not many people can luck their way into it, but there are some lucking and they're into it. And if you don't have it in a trust, and you go back to Brittany's conservatorship,
Yeah.
which I don't know too much about, but there are a reason why there are trust funds and things, because, say, for example, you have a Bezos who, say, for example, if he didn't train his kids, what would that lead to?
Exactly. Yeah, probably just recklessness.
Yeah. I will say this though on poverty, because I was a chair for poverty for a long time, that when you look at poverty, one of the main reasons why poverty exists is not because of lack of opportunities, and it's not because of lack of all these different things, but one of the reasons why poverty exists, especially in America, broken relationships. Because if you, Ashley or Matt, if you guys had a difficulty and all of a sudden your job failed and everything failed,
Right.
you have people that you could go to, friends that would help you, lift you up, family members. I don't want to live with my dad ever again, but if I absolutely needed to, I could.
Right.
Because the relationship's there, the relationship's strong. And because the relationship doesn't have this, because I don't have these incredibly deep relational wounds, I can, if I failed at this endeavor, I could get back out and do a second endeavor.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, they've gone through their emotional intelligence and worn it through it thin.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really important point. I've never thought of it that way. Very cool. Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been such a good conversation, and definitely went down some paths that I didn't expect, but very, very impactful nonetheless. What would be one piece of advice that you'd like to leave our audience?
Well, I'll go back to the quote from my book: "Where you are is not where you have to say." And while we were talking, I had pulled up that my Amazon ads, and this person said, "This is all like motivational hogwash." And I thought,
Oh, geez.
I get what you're talking about. I get it, but it's true. And so if you need some hogwash, if you need some, and what is a hogwash? It's literally just, you got a dirty hog and you're washing it down. So if your mind is cluttered, if your life is messy, if you feel stuck, then get washed down by this motivational quote. Where you are, whether you're stuck in victimhood, whether you're stuck in your fear of speaking, whether you're stuck in your career, whether you're stuck in isolation, you might be there for a while, but it's not where you have to stay forever.
Amen.
And just like the families that go through arduous things to get their life out of where they are and reestablish themselves in the United States to have a different life, or just like the single mom who gets left by everybody and puts herself through college and builds a life, you can do it, but it does start with believing that you can.
Oh, that's so powerful. Awesome. So where can people find more about you online?
Absolutely. So mikeacker.com, and that's Acker like tracker, Acker. So mikeacker.com. You can also get the book, get the second edition of Speak with No Fear. And it's got less hogwash in it. Unless you need the first hogwash, you go for it. But that has been helpful to so many people, as well as my new book, Connect Through Emotional Intelligence.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Everybody, please share this message. Please subscribe. Please rate and review us. And until next time, own your life, because your life is your responsibility. Thank you all for listening. If this added value to you, please click subscribe and rate and review us. You can also find us at Own Your Life Co. on Instagram and Facebook, and ownyourlifeco.com. And as always, own your life, because your life is your responsibility.